start with the prayers, beginning with the recitation of the Heart Sutra. So again, as we recite the Heart Sutra together, bring to mind the meaning of this sutra. If you haven't studied it, at least to bring to mind the teachings on emptiness. That is what the main topic of the sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagawan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. Do the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami. Then refuge in Bodhicitta, as usual, first time in English, and then the other 2 in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sonam gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shog Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chunyen Gi Pe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shog. Okay, thank you, Mary. Let's go ahead and start then with a short meditation as usual. Just focus the mind a bit using the breath as your meditation object. No doubt you have a way that you already work with the breath, so just do that, trying to keep the mind as still and focused as you can. But whenever you see the mind's wandered away from the breath, just guide the mind gently back to the breath. So we'll do this in silence for a few minutes, and then I'll come in and lead you in a short meditation to strengthen our bodhicitta motivation before we begin. So now let's set our motivation for tonight's class. And it's good frequently to go back to this idea of Buddha nature as the basis for the development of the mind of bodhicitta. First of all, when we consider that part of this mind is wanting to become enlightened ourselves, we have to remind ourselves that we have that capacity. The potential of our own minds is that we can achieve Buddhahood. Our minds are empty of inherent existence, therefore they can be changed. And the process of developing our minds from the contaminated state that they're in now to the purified state of Buddhahood is possible due to that emptiness. And of course, by engaging in all of the teachings and practices that will help us to accomplish that goal, to remove all of these adventitious stains, to first be rid of the afflictions, all of these obstructions to our own liberation, and then to remove the subtlest imprints on our minds, these knowledge obstructions that keep us from having the omniscient mind of a Buddha. We can accomplish all of that because we have Buddha nature, because we have a mind that is fundamentally pure, only contaminated by these stains because we simply have not created the causes to abolish them, to eliminate them. So within Buddha nature, we have the perfect understanding of why this goal of us attaining enlightenment is completely possible. But then when we think of the other aspect, even what's called the main aspiration in bodhicitta, which is to lead all other beings to their greatest welfare, to their enlightenment, we can have confidence that that too can be accomplished. Why? Because all beings also have Buddha nature. Just by virtue of having a consciousness, a mind, they have the potential for that mind to develop into the mind of a Buddha. So just as with ourselves, these beings as well can remove those adventitious stains, can eventually completely purify their minds and develop all the positive qualities so they too can attain the state of enlightenment. And that's because they have Buddha nature. So when we set our motivation of bodhicitta, we can do it within that firm grounding of the understanding of the natural purity of the mind and the ability for ourselves and all beings to remove everything that obscures our minds and to develop again all the positive qualities, that which will make us most beneficial to leading others to enlightenment. And so this is why we ourselves are engaging in these teachings tonight, is to accomplish that goal of our own enlightenment so we then can help others to achieve that same state. Okay, good. So we're at our final class in this series on grounds and paths, salam, as it's called in the Tibetan. Let's get grounded in where we were at in terms of the text. And I'm going to do this by going to the chart. So again, we had that chart that Mary did the modifications on. Thank you again, Mary, for doing that so that it now accords with our text. Again, I don't have any definitive information as to which is correct, the previous chart that we had or this one. It does seem that, again, this one is in accord also with what Jeffrey Hopkins presents in Meditation on Emptiness, at least in terms of some of the aspects of it. So again, what we've covered so far is we made it up through the sixth ground in our explanations last week. These grounds, again, cover from the path of seeing, which is where we have our initial direct realization into emptiness for those who have newly entered the Mahayana path. And that becomes the first ground. And then we go on into the second ground where we begin to remove what are called the innate afflictive obstructions. On the path of seeing, all we removed is significant, but is the intellectually acquired afflictive obstructions. So we begin removing those in layers. And so far we've removed the great of the great in terms of the second ground. Then on the third ground, the middling of the great, with the entrance into the fourth ground, we are removing the small of the great. Then we've gone on to remove the great of the middling, and then the middling of the middling when we went into the 6th ground, and then now going into the 7th ground. At the end of the 6th ground, you generate a meditative equipoise on emptiness, and it becomes powerful enough to remove the small of the middling. So we're entering now into the 7th ground, and on the 7th ground, just as a preview, we're going to be talking about how it has the potential then to go on, having removed the middling or small of the middling. And so we've removed both all 3 levels of the great, all 3 levels of the middling, all 3 levels of the small are removed in one meditative equipoise, which is the beginning of the 8th ground. So the 7th ground becomes very powerful, and again, it becomes powerful by way of this absorption of cessation that we talked about a little bit last week, this uncommon absorption of cessation, where the Bodhisattva is able to unite it with a perfection of wisdom and be able to enter into that meditative equipoise on emptiness very easily, very quickly. And on the 7th ground, it comes to an even more advanced level. So let's go ahead and just get grounded then in terms of where our text is at, the outlines that we're going through. Again, we had the Mahayana grounds and paths is the main section that we've been dealing with. We skipped over pretty much the Hinayana grounds and paths. There were the definitions of those. We went into the divisions. And as we saw in terms of the divisions, there were the causal grounds and then the resultant ground. We are still in the causal grounds because we're still in the grounds that lead up to the path of no more learning, the state of Buddhahood. So in particular, we are in the grounds of Bodhisattva superiors, where you have a direct realization into emptiness, again, which began with the path of seeing. So the 2 that are involved here are the path of seeing and the path of meditation. And in particular, now we are in the 3rd section, where we're going into an explanation of the individual divisions, meaning the 10 grounds. The 10 grounds being a way to divide up the path of seeing and the path of meditation in terms of more specific milestones that are met in terms of one's progress towards Buddhahood. So again, we're going to go into the 7th ground in our text. So let's go back to the text. I'll have to pull that up when we get back on the PDF thing here. We are on page 29, I believe, of the text. And so the 7th ground is divided into the same 4 sections that we've seen with all of these grounds. It is called the Gone Afar, and we'll hear a bit more about the etymology of that name, why it was given that name. The first of the 4 sections, the mode of achieving qualities. Remember that each of these increases in terms of the number of qualities that we have. The 12 sets were presented way back in regard to the 1st ground. But on this ground, one achieves the 12 sets of good qualities that were explained previously. But in terms of the number, it's 110,000 trillion fold, which again gets beyond our ability to even imagine what that number must be referring to. We're going to see it growing even greater over the pure grounds, which are the 8th, 9th, and 10th grounds. Then we always have the mode of achieving majesty of power on the 7th ground. What this is referring to is the ability for that ground to again become stronger in terms of being able to remove a subtler level of obstructions. So having seen the signs of being able to abandon simultaneously the 3 cycles of the small afflictive obstructions to be abandoned by a path of meditation, which, as I mentioned a short while ago, these are the all 3 cycles of the small innate afflictive obstructions are going to be abandoned when one enters into the 8th ground. So on the 7th ground, one is developing the strength of power to be able to do that. And so then it says, due to having accumulated the collection of merit in subsequent attainment, that's what the Bodhisattva is doing when they're off their cushion, not doing, nothing. They need to accumulate merit. They need to engage in the other perfections. They need to kind of put a greater store of merit into the bank so that they can have the requisite merit to make progress to the next ground. One then, the text says, sets in meditative equipoise on emptiness. That happens again at the tail end of the 7th ground. Thereby, one meditative consciousness becomes an actual antidote to all 3 of those obstructions, and one is able to move to the 8th ground. And this, of course, will be the removal of the last bit of the afflictive obstructions. So we have removed the acquired on the path of seeing on the 1st ground, and now throughout these 6 grounds that followed, or 7 grounds that followed, going, or 7, yeah, at the end of the, anyway, I explained it all earlier, but you get to the 8th ground and you will have abandoned completely the afflictive obstructions through the uninterrupted paths that were developed, and then the path of release that causes them to, be completely ceased so that they will not occur again. All right, so that's the explanation of what happens in terms of the 7th ground in developing that power, majesty of power. Every one of the grounds also is related to one of the 10 perfections. The mode of surpassing practice of a perfection on the 7th ground says, through the force of having achieved a greatly surpassing practice of the perfection of wisdom, which occurred, of course, on the 6th ground, one now has the capacity manifestly both to enter into and to rise from, in one shortest moment or instant, that uncommon absorption of cessation, which was attained earlier on the 6th ground. So again, the absorption of cessation means to go into a meditative equipoise on emptiness. It was united with the perfection of wisdom on the 6th ground. That's what made it uncommon. Now on the 7th ground, the Bodhisattva is able to enter into that in 1/65th of a finger snap, the shortest moment or instant of time, and come back out of it, rise out of it. So it's pretty amazing the dexterity that the Bodhisattva possesses in regard to entering into meditation on emptiness. So that's the, referring to what happened on the 6th ground that gave the Bodhisattva great power in their minds. So then it says also, whereby one outshines hearers and solitary realizers also by power of intelligence. So those who are hearers and solitary realizers, especially those who have accomplished the Hinayana path, who are foe destroyers, even though this Bodhisattva has not yet destroyed the foe, abandoned completely the afflictive obstructions, it is said that they do outshine these practitioners by power of intelligence, that their wisdom has gone way beyond that of the hearers or solitary realizers. So then the next sentence, also having cultivated vastly a joy which is free from conceit with respect to all the virtuous roots of oneself and others in terms of the 6 perfections of giving and so forth, one achieves a surpassing practice of the perfection of method, which increases that joy higher and higher. So it's called method here. Another word for it is skill and means. The Sanskrit word is upaya. Let's go to the slides for a moment, just so that I can share with you a little bit more about, I figured that since these last 4 perfections, we don't really hear that much about them in our studies. The first 6 we know very well, the 6 paramitas and so forth. But here, regarding this, these are some passages from Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on Chandrakirti's supplement to the Middle Way, the text that we studied in the master's program that was a whole survey of the 10 grounds. The skill and means, or method, that is posited as the perfection of skill and means is as follows. The Bodhisattva grounds of Asanga says, the first of the 2 groups of 6 that were taught, the 6 internal skill and means that begin to accomplish the qualities of a Buddha, are that the Bodhisattvas, first, view all sentient beings while possessing compassion, know the correct nature of all compounded phenomena just as it is, in other words, their emptiness, desire the unsurpassed exalted wisdom of enlightenment, do not forsake cyclic existence and dependence on viewing all sentient beings. In other words, they don't leave samsara and check out into a space of nirvana by any means. Circle in or have the desire to do that. Circle in cyclic existence with an unafflicted mind in dependence on knowing compounded phenomena just as they are. So they continue to abide in cyclic existence with their mind free of afflictions and dependence on knowing things, again, with the wisdom of emptiness. And they blaze with effort in dependence on desiring enlightenment. So the Bodhisattva has become very powerful and has the great skill and means from the side of their own minds, the internal 6 skill and means. The 6 external skill and means that begin to ripen sentient beings, this is again how they behave outwardly in regard to other beings, is that the Bodhisattvas first transform the small roots of virtue of sentient beings into immeasurable results, and similarly accomplish great roots of virtue by means of little hardship. So it doesn't really take much for them to accumulate great virtue in relation to their activities with other sentient beings, through giving, through all of the other perfections and so on. Thirdly, they eliminate the anger of those who hate the teachings, those who despise the teachings or who have animosity towards Buddhism, what have you. They would be able to eliminate their anger through the skill and means that they have to help them to overcome that anger. The fourth is to lead those who are able or who abide with a neutral mind regarding the teachings. So those who have a neutral mind, not a mind of animosity, as we saw in the last one, but who have a neutral mind, they can skillfully lead them to develop greater conviction in the teachings. Fifthly, they can ripen those who are engaging in the teachings already. And sixth, liberate those who have been ripened. So even though they're not Buddhas yet, on the seventh ground, they have this skill and means that allows them to know how to benefit other beings. Remember, skill and means is an extension of our wisdom, as are the other three perfections that we're going to see on the pure grounds. They derive from the wisdom that the Bodhisattva has at this point. And again, this would be a surpassing practice of these, not necessarily the full perfection of them, which is actually achieved when one attains Buddhahood. So let's go back to our text and continue with the next point, the fourth point that is presented for each of these, the mode of taking fruitional rebirth on the second ground, or seventh ground. Because the Bodhisattva, again, develops greater power, they take even more magnificent rebirths. So there is a mode of taking fruitional rebirth because, having taken birth as a lord of the land of controlling others' emanations, one furthers the welfare of sentient beings in that role, that rebirth that they take. Okay, so that's the 4 points. Then again, as usual, we have a little quote from Precious Garland, Nagarjuna's text that talks about each of these grounds. The seventh is the gone afar, because the number of good qualities has increased. Moment by moment, the Bodhisattva can enter the equipoise of cessation. Again, that absorption of cessation that is uncommon. Through the maturation of these qualities, the Bodhisattva becomes a master of the gods in the land of control over others' emanations. They become a great leader of teachers because of directly realizing the Four Noble Truths. Again, there is more information in some of the texts on the Four Noble Truths, but I think all of you have studied that well enough that I don't need to go into all of that. Remember, there are grosser aspects of them, subtler aspects of them, but again, we won't go into that detail tonight. There is a reason for calling this ground the gone afar, because in dependence upon cultivating the path for a long time, there is an uninterrupted relationship between the two, the final path having signs and having exertion, and the path of soul passage. So there's a footnote for these, this uninterrupted relationship between these two, of going from one into the other. So in the footnote, number 21 there, the final path having signs and having exertion refers to the end of the seventh ground. Again, that would be that last place where the Bodhisattva is making great effort to overcome the small afflictive obstructions that are innate. So then the path of soul progress refers to the last of the three periods of countless eons necessary for attaining Buddhahood in the system of the perfection vehicle. So that is what the Bodhisattva is entering into. Remember from the chart that what is happening here when this demarcation that starts with this letter H down here, when the Bodhisattva technically becomes equivalent to a foe destroyer in terms of their attainment of the complete elimination of the afflictive obstructions, they begin the amassing of the third great countless eon of merit, which again is up at the top of the chart there. And of course, they've entered into the pure grounds that are called that because the Bodhisattva is pure in terms of no longer having any ignorance, any delusions in their mind. They're even free of self-cherishing in its entirety, nothing that would arise that would disturb the mind. At that point, they again begin to work on the knowledge obstructions in the eighth ground and above. But that's kind of the demarcation then from going from this last meditative equipoise that is building that sort of strength through the exertion that one needs to remove those final afflictive obstructions into the beginning of the accumulation of the merit that will be for that third great countless eon of merit. So Maitreya's ornament for the Mahayana Sutras says, because it is related with the path of soul passage, this ground is asserted as the ground of the gone afar. You know, that Bodhisattva has gone way further, and they will go, beyond certainly wherever the hearers and solitary realizers have gone in terms of their own attainment of foe destroyer. So Nagarjuna's praise of the element of qualities says, because of establishing the wheel of doctrine, this is a question in the translator's mind, would think that it would refer to that, establishing the Dharma wheel in all aspects, playing in the lattice work of light, and having crossed the the mud of the ocean of cyclic existence, it is called the gone afar. Because the Bodhisattva has gone into that, is entering into that soul passage, the entrance into the third great countless eon. I think he says that this is, translation doubtful. He had a lot of questions, I think, about what he was translating, or, from those verses of Nagarjuna's in particular. All right, so I did want to, as I've been doing, talk a little bit about bodhicitta on this level. Remember, there are the 22 levels of bodhicitta that occur throughout the entire path of the Mahayana, all the way to through the Buddha ground. Bodhicitta on the seventh ground is called virtuous friend-like bodhicitta, because the seventh ground is characterized by bodhisattvas specifically focusing on the practice of the perfection of method or skillful means. And just as a virtuous friend never gives up the welfare of sentient beings, likewise, owing to the bodhisattva's skillful means, they never forsake the welfare of a single sentient being. That's where their skill and means is so that they are like a virtuous friend to all beings. Obviously, they can't be a virtuous friend to all beings at that point, but they nonetheless have that same skillful means that is like a virtuous friend. And that's why the bodhicitta is called that. This is from my teacher, Geshe Jampa Gyatso. The mind generation associated with skillful means is like a spiritual guide, because it never gives up the welfare of sentient beings through the method for not rejecting sentient beings, which is essentially the four immeasurable thoughts. In Sutra, in this regard, it says even a single generation of a virtuous mind is a skillful means. So again, the four immeasurable thoughts are immeasurable equanimity, love, compassion, and joy. And those are what keep you kind of engaged in wanting to benefit others, those deep minds of wanting the welfare of other beings. By way of the method of the four immeasurables, such a bodhisattva never gives up sentient beings. To the contrary, when we work for sentient beings, Geshe-la says, there are many things that affect our attitude. For example, when someone wealthy asks for our help, someone who's well off, who we think well of, we may be eager to help him, while we may be reluctant to help a poor person, someone who maybe, again, doesn't have the things that we are normally looking for in somebody that we would be endeared to or something. Again, and these qualities don't necessarily have to be spelled out for each of us. We all have our own biases that lead us into problems, difficulties, where we don't have a perfect, even regard for all beings. Unlike ourselves, for a bodhisattva, there is no difference. They are always happy to perform activities for helping sentient beings. A bodhisattva works for sentient beings with immeasurable love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Okay, so let's go back to the text, toggle back and forth for a bit, and go into the eighth ground. Again, the eighth ground is whoops, I'd hit the wrong one. I thought I'd hit that. There we go. Okay, it just didn't take when I hit it. The eighth ground, again, is the beginning of the pure grounds, and this is where the bodhisattva is developing the strength of mind to begin abandoning the knowledge obstructions, those that obstruct omniscience, which again are the subtle imprints of ignorance that we have in our minds that give rise to a dualistic appearance, a false appearance of things existing inherently from their own side. It's called immovable. It has four parts. Again, as usual, on this ground, first in terms of qualities, the one achieves each of the 12 sets of good qualities explained previously, equal to the number of minute particles of 100,000 realms of 100,000 great billion worlds. If you can figure out what number that is, I'll give you a special treat. So I don't know. I mean, that's just beyond my understanding of what comprehension of what that number is equivalent to. Let's go ahead and go on to the second section, how the Bodhisattva achieves majesty of power. Remember, there's an extra uninterrupted path in the middle of the eighth ground, or within the eighth ground. Usually they are happening at the tail end, and they become the beginning of the next ground, according to our text. But as it says here, when, having just attained this ground, at the time of actualizing the non-conceptual exalted wisdom, which is without coarse exertion, the Buddhas of the 10 directions arouse the Bodhisattva from meditative equipoise and exhort them to accumulate the collection of merit in subsequent attainment. So this is as they're coming into the very beginning of the eighth ground. The Bodhisattva has both passed beyond the youthful grounds, the grounds where one is just removing all of the afflictions, and stopped the nirvana possessing selfish thoughts. So this is why the Buddhas come forward, is to make sure that they don't abide in that solitary peace. Now again, the bodhicitta is already so strong that I don't think there's much danger of doing that, but nonetheless the Buddhas are there to encourage them on, kind of like, people on the marathon track that are making sure people can hang in there for those last few miles to get to the finish line. In accordance with the exhortations of the Buddhas, one amasses the collection of merit for measureless eons for the sake of abandoning the obstructions to omniscience. Remember, there's that additional third great countless eon of merit that is accumulated to do that. Then the text says, thereby one abandons the great of the predispositions for mistaken dualistic appearances on the upper half of the eighth ground. Through amassing the collection of merit again, one is able to move to the ninth ground simultaneously with achieving an actual antidote to the middling of the predispositions for mistaken dualistic appearance. So again, on our chart, this is demonstrated by, at the beginning, this is where the Bodhisattva is coming out of meditative equipoise, having abandoned completely the afflictive obstructions. They are beckoned out by the Buddhas to engage in their accumulation of merit during the subsequent attainment. They go into this meditative equipoise. It's a little bit skinnier simply because we needed to fit it into the space that was there. And they are able to abandon the 1/3 of the afflicted or knowledge obstructions, the great knowledge obstructions. They're the coarsest ones. Then they go into a meditative, come out into subsequent attainment, then they go into a meditative equipoise at the tail end of the eighth ground that leads them into the ninth ground, where they abandon the middling of the knowledge obstructions. And then remember that we're going to see this coming forward, but the small are divided into two parts. The course of the small, which is what they abandon going into the 10th ground, and then the small of the small, which is the final subtlest obstructions that are removed at the tail end of the Bodhisattva's path before they enter the path of no more learning and become a Buddha. Okay, so that's how they achieve majesty in regard to the power to be able to progress on the path. So let me scroll up a little or down. There we go. Mode of surpassing practice of a perfection. It says, by way of dedicating in the manner of non-observation of agent, object, and activity as inherently existent. This is the application of what we often call the emptiness of the three spheres. The agent, the Bodhisattva themselves, that is engaging in this act of dedicating, the object, which are the merits dedicated, and the activity of dedicating. All of these lack inherent existence. They're empty. So by way of dedicating the virtues of the six perfections, giving and so forth, of oneself and others in that manner, which were, are, and will be accumulated in the three times as causes of complete enlightenment for the sake of others, and by way of planting various aspiration prayers, one achieves a surpassing practice of the perfection of aspirational prayers. So I didn't really find out a whole lot of information on prayers. I'm going to share one little slide on that just to give you what Lama Tsongkhapa says about the prayers of this Bodhisattva. The prayers of the eighth grounder, a million countless prayers, such as the 10 great prayers, which I believe is referring to the 10 great prayers of Samantabhadra, but they're sometimes called the 10 vows of Samantabhadra, but it's kind of a prayer of wanting to fulfill those vows, wanting to benefit others in the variety of ways. Anyway, those 10 great prayers and so forth that were planted before, when they generated the first supermundane mind on the first ground, are thoroughly purified on this ground. That is, the perfection of prayer becomes surpassing on this ground. So that the Bodhisattva's prayers become very, very powerful through the force of their mind and the way that they are dedicating and so on. Remember that dedications are prayers, essentially. They are ways that we direct energy to particular goals. We can't say all prayers are dedications, but certainly all dedications are prayers. And prayer, as we know in Buddhism, serves a variety of functions, but generally it's about trying to work with our own minds and energy and what we're moving in particular directions through dedicating, through aspirations, what have you. Many of you know the aspirational prayer of Samantabhadra, where I think the 10 vows are listed in there as part of that prayer. But anyway, let's go back to our text and get into the next section as to the let's see, the next one of taking fruitional rebirth, having taken birth as a great Brahma, Lord who is foremost in the generality of the thousand worlds, one furthers the aims of sentient beings. Again, I can't say much about these various rebirths, but the implication is that they are even more powerful beings in terms of the dominion that they have over worlds. And of course, they don't want it for the sake of the power and, all the benefits or something. They want it because they want to benefit scores of sentient beings, as many beings as can be benefited. So that concludes the 4 points for the eighth ground. Then it goes on to again quote from Nagarjuna's Precious Garland on the eighth, saying, the eighth is the immovable, the youthful ground. Through non-conceptuality, the Bodhisattva is immovable, and the spheres of their body, speech, and mind's activities are inconceivable. So again, through the non-conceptuality of the mind that is able to know emptiness fully and has completely abandoned any ignorance, any imprints of ignorance or what have you, their activities become amazing at this level. Through the maturation of these qualities, they become a Brahma, Lord of 1,000 worlds. Foe destroyers and solitary realizers and so forth cannot surpass the Bodhisattva in laying out the meaning of the doctrines. In other words, their teaching to others and their understanding of Dharma is impeccable at this point. Again, just speaking to the qualities that Bodhisattvas have at this level. There is a reason for calling this ground the immovable, because through the force of having vanquished any chance for generating manifest conceptions of true existence and of having thoroughly pacified coarse exertion, one is not moved by either discrimination having signs or signless discrimination having exertion. So there is a footnote for this too. So again, it was the idea that you're not moved by either of these two. Discrimination that's having signs, which is referring to having a sign of inherent existence, because again, you don't have that conception present in the mind at all. You've removed all of your afflictive obstructions. Therefore, you've removed all of your ignorance. Or signless discrimination having exertion. Signless discrimination would be the discrimination of someone who is free of ignorance. But having exertion means, as the footnote says, that it refers to an awareness realizing emptiness in the continuum of a non-Buddha. So such a consciousness is free from coarse exertion, but not free from subtle exertion. I had a hard time cluing that into what that the commentary said up above, because it says again that they're free of either of these. Again, the discrimination having signs, it's obvious why they'd be free of that. Signless discrimination having exertion, maybe what they're meaning here is the coarse exertion rather than the subtle exertion. So they are free of the coarse exertion, but still have subtle exertion that is required. That's at least how I'm reading it based on what that footnote says. So we go back up to the top of the page, and we have once more a quote from Maitreya's ornament for the Mahayana Sutras, which says, because this bodhisattva is not moved by the two discriminations, he or she is definitely called the immovable. Again, those were the two discriminations that we just saw. Nagarjuna's praise of the element of quality says, since this bodhisattva is definitely held by the Buddhas, enters the ocean of exalted wisdom, and is spontaneously without striving, he or she is not moved by the circle of demons or maras, what have you. So again, I can't really say much about that, particular passage, but it's just once more speaking to the power of this bodhisattva who now doesn't have to worry about, for a second, ignorance arising or any of the delusions. They're pure in that way, and so all of their actions again become very powerful with that wisdom. I did want to give you different takes on this idea of immovable. I don't know if I spelled it wrong on this slide, or if it's wrong in the text, or if it's both, can be spelled both ways. For some reason, I spelled it without the E, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. But it's called immovable for various reasons. What we saw, again, by not being moved by those two discriminations, but here also because the mind of the eighth grounder who has abandoned the stains of self-cherishing. As I mentioned, self-cherishing is completely abandoned as well. That is another thing that makes us into a pure ground, these three grounds. Consequently, they're not moved by an awareness striving for solitary peace, and so will not be moved from achieving Buddhahood. Again, I don't think that the Bodhisattva has much chance of falling into solitary peace at this level because their bodhicitta is so strong, but nonetheless, they have completely removed any stains of self-cherishing. So that also makes them immovable in terms of going forward to Buddhahood. Secondly, because this bodhisattva has abandoned the afflictions, so their mind is not moved by ignorance and so forth. So again, that can be the idea of not just the discrimination with signs, the ignorance, but also not moved by any of the afflictions. Their mind doesn't have that movement in a deluded way. Thirdly, from Geshe Kelsang Wangmo, this is what she says, and again, I don't have any commentary from her, so I don't know what she means by all of these, but it says, because this bodhisattva dwells firmly in their realization of emptiness and cannot be perturbed by different ideas and appearances. Again, it seems like she's just talking about in regard to ignorance, discriminating signs, what have you, of inherent existence, that none of this happens, but nonetheless, I just wanted to put her words up there as well. But these are all different ways we could talk about this being immovable for the eighth grounder. Bodhicitta on this level is called wish-fulfilling gem-like bodhicitta because the eighth ground is characterized by bodhisattvas specifically focusing here on the practice of the perfection of prayer. And just as a wish-fulfilling gem actualizes all dreams and aspiration, this is this mythical gem that you find in the ocean, and you clean it and you put it on a post on the 15th day of a lunar month, a full moon day, and it's supposed to be able to grant you all these wishes. It's kind of like a genie in the bottle, or what have you, but with no limitation on your wishes, as many wishes as you want. But the idea is that we often say that bodhicitta is more precious than that, because wish-fulfilling gems can only get us material things, whereas bodhicitta can develop our minds to the greatest degree. But nonetheless, this is the analogy for this. So just as a wish-fulfilling gem actualizes all these dreams and aspirations, likewise, the bodhisattva has attained the 6 clairvoyances and so forth, and thus are able to actualize many of their prayers and aspirations concerning the welfare of sentient beings. So again, this is an extension of our wisdom, just as the previous perfection was of skillful means or method. The 6 clairvoyances do arise within the bodhisattva's mind at this point, if they haven't already arisen. I'm not going to go into detailed explanation of these. This is just to give you an idea. Magical emanation, which allows them to emanate in various ways. Again, we already saw that the bodhisattva has incredible ability to do that based on the 12 sets of qualities that they're multiplying on each ground. The divine ear, allowing to hear things from great distances, knowing others' minds, that's self-explanatory, recalling previous states, previous rebirths, the divine eye that allows you to see at great distances, and then the 6th one, which is the exhaustion of contaminations, which again, according to some of the lower schools, they would say that they don't have this yet because the contaminations aren't exhausted until later when they achieve Buddhahood. But here, the contaminations have been exhausted. Why? Because the afflictive obstructions are gone. The Bodhisattva has this clairvoyance that knows the exhaustion of contaminations in their own mind. So this was Geshe-la's commentary from one of those lower schools, what's called Svatantrika Madhyamika, the other branch of Prasangika, of Madhyamika, besides Prasangika. As I just explained in Prasangika, all 6 are attained on the 8th ground, whereas Svatantrika Madhyamaka posits only the 5 there, because in that presentation of paths and grounds, they are actually removing both levels of knowledge and afflictive obstructions on each ground. So you have kind of this, you don't attain freedom from both of them until you attain Buddhahood. Anyway, Geshe-la says, the mind generation associated with prayer and like a wish-granting jewel corresponds with the 8th ground. Gyaltsab says that the mind generation associated with prayer is like a wish-granting jewel because it brings about the wished-for result by way of the method of the 5 clairvoyances, again, because that's what that school would teach, which have gained control over the result. Sutra says, accomplishing enlightenment, the exalted body of a Buddha. So again, this is how the Bodhisattva continues to advance in their progress towards enlightenment, be able to know the minds of others, to see all these things that will help them from their previous lives, to be able to benefit others. The Bodhisattva becomes very adept at all of that. Okay, so we get on to the 9th ground. Here we go back to the text. And on page 32 of our text, we have the presentation of the 9th ground, which is called good intelligence. Good intelligence is, again, one name that we have for this ground. On our chart, we actually have gone beyond, and that's not on this chart. Remember that there's the other chart that we didn't correct. That was the first one that I gave all of you. Just know that there you might see in different presentations a different name for this ground, gone beyond, or rather than good intelligence. So the mode of achieving qualities, on this ground, one attains the 12 sets of good qualities equal to the number of minute particles of 10,100,000 countless realms of a great 1,000 billion worlds. Again, don't ask me what number that is. It's a huge one. Achieving power. On this ground, just as the prince approaches being bestowed empowerment as regent, this bodhisattva approaches close to being bestowed the empowerment of great light rays, which we'll see an explanation of shortly. Having amassed the collection of merit for the sake of abandoning the course of the small predispositions for mistaken dualistic appearance, again, the knowledge obstructions, one sees the signs of being able to abandon those. And from within meditative equipoise on emptiness, one is able to go to the 10th ground by achieving that antidote. So again, once more real quickly, that's what's happening here in terms of at the end of the 9th ground. Coming into the 9th ground, the bodhisattvas removed both the course as well, course right here in the middle of the 8th ground, and the middling at the beginning of the 9th ground. Now the bodhisattva generates the antidote to the first of the 2 levels of the small knowledge obstructions, which again is the course of the small, or great of the small. All right, so let's go back to our text. Get this scrolled up a bit. One achieves a greatly surpassing practice of the perfection of power from the point of view of having come to a potent capacity for definite achievement of the 6 perfections, not being overwhelmed by the discordant class of any of them. Again, their minds are so powerful in terms of never having anything that is discordant arising in regard to our practice of generosity, morality, enthusiasm, patience, all of these things. They are essentially without any barriers because the Bodhisattva, again, has removed all negative tendencies in the mind, only has to remove these subtle obscurations that are keeping the dualistic appearance, which blocks their Buddhahood. So let's take a look at what is meant by power, and then we'll come back to this. I did, again, want to give a little more information on each of these perfections that are in the latter grounds, because we don't have any real commentary. And here it says, on the ninth ground, all powers, that is the perfection of power of the Bodhisattva, are completely purified. The explanation of the 10 powers is as taught in the ornament for the subduer's intention. Now it's interesting, so Tsongkhapa's text says 10, but at this level, the 10 powers are actually something that is achieved with Buddhahood, and they are a different list. We're going to see them later. What is here is a list of actually 13 powers, and I don't want to go into, again, detailed commentary. It just gives you a flavor for the power of the Bodhisattva on the ninth ground. The powers that are presented in the sutra sets are the power of thought, because of never experiencing afflictions; superior thought, because of thoroughly training in the exalted wisdom of the grounds; retention, because of not forgetting the Dharma; meditative stabilization, because of never being distracted; perfect endowments, because of being skilled in distinguishing the conduct in the infinite and endless realms of the world; power of control, because of attaining the thorough completion of all hopes; self-confidence, because of being skilled in distinguishing the practice of all the Buddha's Dharma; prayer, because of not giving up application in the conduct of all the Buddhas; the power of perfection, because of thoroughly ripening the Buddha's Dharma, thoroughly ripening sentient beings, and not giving up the conduct of benefiting sentient beings by themselves; the power of great love, because of not giving up supreme application in protecting all sentient beings; the power of great compassion, because of eliminating all the suffering of all sentient beings; the power of reality, because of actualizing the reality that is like an illusion, and so forth; the power of the blessings of all the Tathagatas, because of approaching the exalted wisdom of an exalted knower of all aspects, which is referring to a Buddha's omniscient mind. So again, you're getting closer, you're approaching, your powers are becoming greater, so you have access to more of the blessings of those Buddhas to aid you on your path to enter into the 10th and final ground, and then to go on to Buddhahood. So also, besides this, and we're going to see this reference when we go back to our text, the Bodhisattva also completes the perfection, besides the perfection of power, also attains the 4 completely pure specific qualities of the individual correct knowledges. Now, again, these are part of the qualities of a Buddha that are attained on the Buddha ground. And so they're not in their fully qualified form, but nonetheless, a similitude of these is developed on the 9th ground. The individual correct knowledge of phenomena, of meanings, of definitive words, and of self-assurance. And just to give you a brief description of those, Tsongkhapa says, with respect to them, it is taught in the auto-commentary, this is Chandrakirti's auto-commentary to his own text, that by means of the first, he fully knows the individual characteristics of each and every phenomenon. Again, that was the individual characteristics of individual correct knowledge of phenomena. So we go on to meanings. By means of the second, he knows the divisions of the aspects of all phenomena. It was without any block to knowing the various meanings of these various categories of phenomena. By means of the third, he knows the individual presentations of phenomena without mixing them, and by means of the fourth, he fully knows without interruption the concordant causes of phenomena. So again, those two were the definitive words and self-assurance, kind of the knowledge of self-assurance, so that one, knows these things without any interruption, without any hesitation, all the concordant causes of things. So again, these are pretty amazing knowledges already attained to some degree on the 9th ground. The Bodhisattva, again, when they become a Buddha, will attain these in a purified state. And of course, when we talk about the omniscient mind of a Buddha, it knows everything. So this is just a way of talking about the various things that a Buddha would know and the knowledges that they possess. In other texts, know that they are explained as the knowledge of phenomena, the knowledge of meanings to be expressed, the knowledge of definitive words that are terms, and the knowledge of the non-exhaustion of self-assurance, these being synonyms. Again, I can't speak much about that. I just thought I'd throw it out there because you might see different presentations of those. They are studied in the basic program as part of the 4th chapter of the ornament for clear realization by Maitreya, which I did teach one time previously. Let's go back to our text, and then we'll come back and talk about bodhicitta on this level. I kind of want to keep the same order that I've been doing for these. So we do have the fourth and final category for the ninth ground. Having taken birth as a great Brahma, Lord of a million worlds, one accomplishes the aims of sentient beings. Again, to be Lord of a million worlds sounds pretty amazing, so again, you can do incredible beneficial things in that role, that rebirth. So Nagarjuna's precious garland in turn says, the ninth is called good intelligence. Like a regent, the Bodhisattva has attained correct individual knowledge, those four that I just mentioned, and therefore has good intelligence on this ground. Through the maturation of these qualities, the Bodhisattva becomes a Brahma who is master of a million worlds. Foe destroyers and so forth cannot surpass him or her in responding to questions in the thoughts of sentient beings, because again, this bodhisattva has that good intelligence, that correct knowledge and what have you, to be able to do that. There is a reason for calling this ground good intelligence, because one attains the good intelligence of the four individual correct knowledges and cannot be surpassed by hearer and solitary realizer foe destroyers from the point of view of internal contradictions or mistakes and so forth with respect to thoughts or questions in the minds of trainees. So it's at that point that you have an ability to answer questions from whoever with no contradictions, no mistakes, no hesitation, that knowledge kind of perfected to some degree. Maitreya's ornament for the Mahayana Sutras, because it has the good intelligence of the individual correct knowledges, this ground is that of good intelligence. And then from praise of the element of qualities, since this yogi has completed all the individual correct knowledges and sermons teaching the doctrine, this ground is asserted as that of good intelligence. All right, so let's finish off and have our little break. We're just going to go through the remainder of this, talking about the bodhicitta on this level. It's called sun-like, because the ninth ground, again, has to do with the practice of the perfection of power. And just as the sun shines equally on everything and ripens crops and so forth, likewise, the bodhisattva works equally for the benefit of all sentient beings and obtains the four means of gathering disciples. They would have been practicing these four previously, but they have, again, a more powerful way of engaging in that because of their complete equal work for all beings, just like the sun. So let's go on to what Geshe-la says. He says, the mind generation associated with power is like the sun because it thoroughly ripens the continua of sentient beings by the four means of gathering disciples. In Sutra, it says, bodhisattvas, food, drink, clothes, and so forth are completed by the mind of sentient beings. That's going to come up in his explanation of the four means. The four means, which you should be familiar with, the first, these are in your Lam Rim text generally, the first is giving necessities to sentient beings. In fact, there are many things that can be given to disciples in order to subdue them, including food, drink, clothes, jewels, house, garden, and so forth. So we should have that mind of wanting to connect with others through material generosity. That's an entry point for us to be able to begin to benefit them. Then secondly, one engages in speaking to them pleasantly, starts to give the Dharma, gives teachings according to their needs. And of course, one of the most important things, practices in accordance with what one teaches. In brief, one tries to gradually lead disciples in the practice of the six perfections. There are two principal types of generosity in this context of the four means then, that of giving Dharma teachings and that of giving material objects. So these three that are on the screen are all about giving Dharma teachings, because one teaches through what one says, giving teachings according to the needs of those people, and then of course, by example, by actually practicing what you preach. Okay, that's a good place for us to take a little break. So I have 8:06. Let's cut it just a little bit short so I make sure I have enough time for the text tonight. So let's say 8:15, if that's okay with everyone, and I'll ring the bell to bring you all back. So, all right, have a good. Okay, good. Welcome back. So just as a reminder, if you do want to ask a question and something comes up and you don't want to forget the question, you can put it in the chat box and I'll be happy to address it at the end. But I'm hoping I'll have time to at least take some questions at the end. So if you have a question, you can also ask it then. So let's get back into our text and talk about the 10th ground. So again, recall the 10th ground is the tail end now of the Bodhisattva's path before they enter into Buddhahood with the path of no more learning. So it is called the cloud of doctrine, kind of the idea being like there's a cloud that is filled with the potential of raining then, so that it rains down Dharma. So this is the idea behind this. We're going to see that in the etymology of that a little bit later. So in terms of the qualities, these 12 sets of qualities, they're equal now to the number of subtle particles in an inexpressible number of an inexpressible number of Buddha lands. I don't know. It gets to be, again, kind of unbelievable, the amount of qualities that the Bodhisattva has at this level. But once more, these are nothing compared to the power that and the qualities that will be there when one becomes a Buddha. So at least, again, we have this idea of it being at the the greatest it can be before one actually becomes enlightened, which sounds pretty, magnificent to begin with. So in terms of the mode of achieving majesty of power on this ground, as soon as one attains this ground, the Buddhas of the 10 directions bestow the empowerment of great light rays. Remember, we saw that in the 9th ground description, that the Bodhisattva there was coming close to receiving this sort of empowerment, whereby one becomes a lofty regent of the ones gone thus, the Tathagatas, the kings of doctrine. So you become, like, I don't know, empowered into this special position that you have as a 10th grounder that is, unique. It's quite an accomplishment to have made it to the 10th ground. Though again, the accomplishments of getting to Buddhahood are still in front of you. And then once you become a Buddha, the qualities, again, are even greater. So in subsequent attainment, which again is what is happening here, going back to the chart, it's the white area here where it says Exalted Wisdom on the 10th ground. Bodhisattvas come out of their meditative equipoise that removed the coarse of the small. They are then going to engage in all the activities that will enable them to remove through that last uninterrupted path the small of the small, the knowledge obstructions. So in subsequent attainment, our text says, one achieves a similitude of a Buddha's mode of acting for the sake of others. It's not identical, but it's like that. Again, similitude means very similar, but not identical, whereby one finishes very quickly the accumulation of the collection of merit that takes 3 periods of countless great eons. Again, that was what we saw at the top of the chart, those 3 great eons. So the Bodhisattva has amazing power here to complete this collection of the 3rd great countless eon of merit. Then one actualizes what's known as the Vajra-like meditative stabilization. We saw this in our study of the Heart Sutra, right? It's what happens at the very tail end of the path of meditation. It is the last meditative equipoise that the Bodhisattva goes into before becoming a Buddha. It's called Vajra-like because it's like a Vajra, an indestructible substance that will never be moved from that. You go into that meditative equipoise and you don't move. You have a continuity of it until you come out the other side as a Buddha. So it's the Vajra-like meditative stabilization, the Mahayana path of meditation, which is the actual antidote to the very subtle predispositions for mistaken dualistic appearance. Again, the very subtle, the small of the small, or the subtle of the small. In the next moment, one is able to pass to the Buddha ground. In terms of the perfection on the 10th ground, since one has gained a similitude of a Buddha's eye of wisdom, for which all the secrecies of the conqueror's speech are not hidden, one achieves a greatly surpassing practice of the perfection of exalted wisdom, within which, completely apprehending by oneself the words and meanings of the high speech, one ripens others. So the Bodhisattva has great power through developing us, again, a similitude of the Buddha's wisdom that they will have when they attain Buddhahood. So let's look at these two ideas that were just mentioned in terms of some of the slides I prepared. First of all, this empowerment of light rays, that is the kind of entry point into the 10th ground. This is a short description of it. It's kind of missing some of the middle chunks, but it gives you a flavor of what this is about. The Bodhisattva abiding on the 10th ground attains the highest, that is the supreme empowerment of the great light rays from the Buddhas in all 10 directions. The way in which this is attained is as taught in the Sutra on the 10 grounds. So although this might seem like it has to do with kind of tantric empowerment, it's really a Sutra empowerment of the Buddhas. But nonetheless, you're going to see that the Bodhisattva does at some point need to enter into Tantra to complete the path. We'll get to that at the tail end of our slides, but goes on to say, this is the quote from that sutra, this Bodhisattva, this is the beginning quote, and then it's going to have the final quote where it concludes. This Bodhisattva, at the end of 1,000,000 countless meditative stabilizations attained, actualizes the meditative stabilization called possessing empowerment not different from the exalted wisdom of omniscient being. So again, it has this very special meditative stabilization that is similar to the exalted wisdom of the Buddhas. Then immediately a lotus of huge jewels, equal in size to 1,000,000,000,000 world systems, adorned with jewels, having the best of all types. I was kind of ashamed that it doesn't have the rest of this part of the passage. I was kind of waiting to see what this lotus of huge jewels does, but and then the closing passage ends with extensively will arise having a circle of lotuses equaling the particles that are the entirety of the subtle particles in the 1,000,000,000,000 world systems. The bodies of that bodhisattva also abide in conformity with them. Remember, the bodhisattva has many, many bodies at this point. All those, that enumeration of the qualities, one of them again was to have all these various emanations and bodies, and so all of those bodies will abide in conformity. As soon as the bodhisattva attains this meditative stabilization, they always appear sitting on that lotus that has come forth, this huge lotus. They sit there, and from the treasure hair of the Buddha Bhagawans assembled from all the Buddha fields, rays of light will arise, conferring empowerment on that bodhisattva. So this is kind of what happens to in the mind, the experience of that 10th ground bodhisattva. It is receiving these light ray empowerments of all the Buddhas. That again will bless that being to be able to finish the path and become a Buddha. Regarding the perfection of exalted wisdom, which again, there was this question I think came up earlier in terms of exalted wisdom versus wisdom. What is the difference between these two? In the context of the perfections, there is a difference. In that bodhisattva, from among the 10 perfections, the surpassing perfection of exalted wisdom will also arise as supreme, that is, will be purified. This is what Tsongkhapa says. Then he goes on to talk about the difference. The difference between these two is taught in Asanga's Bodhisattva grounds, Bodhisattva Bhumi. That, knowing the presentation of all phenomena as they are, is the perfection of exalted wisdom. The wisdom that engages in apprehending the ultimate only, meaning emptiness, is the perfection of wisdom. That engaging in apprehending the conventional is the perfection of exalted wisdom. These are the particularities of the two. So essentially the difference is that the wisdom that we call the perfection of wisdom is engaging in the ultimate emptiness. But there is also, the whole other categorization of phenomena, which is the conventional truths. And of course, that is also known by the perfection of exalted wisdom. And this is sometimes talked about as the division of wisdom, is that wisdom mind doesn't just know emptiness, it knows all phenomena. That's what an omniscient mind is. So again, this is a similitude of a Buddha's omniscient mind that knows both conventional and ultimate truths, and it is an exalted wisdom because of that, whereas the perfection of wisdom is only with regard to the ultimate truth of emptiness. Okay, so we come back to this after we go through the remaining part of it. Thank you for your patience and all of my going back and forth. So then we go on to the mode of taking fruitional rebirth. Having taken birth on this 10th ground, the final ground, as Maheshvara, king of the gods in the highest land, one affects the welfare of sentient beings. Again, must be, a tremendous, powerful position that the 10th ground Bodhisattva has rebirth in. 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 10th ground Bodhisattva has reb Precious Garland gives 2 verses that talk about the 10th ground. The rain of excellent doctrine falls again from this cloud of Dharma. It's just like the cloud is just full of rain to dispel down. And so again, that's how the Bodhisattva on this ground is in terms of their ability to rain the Dharma on others. So the rain of excellent doctrine falls. The Bodhisattva is consecrated with light rays by the Buddhas. Through the maturation of these qualities, the Bodhisattva becomes a master of the gods of pure abode. He or she is a supreme great Lord, master of the sphere of infinite wisdom. So again, a Bodhisattva at this level doesn't have yet the omniscient mind of a Buddha that is able to know all phenomena as well as to know them all simultaneously, which is what an omniscient mind can do, but nonetheless has, amazing wisdom. There is a reason for calling this ground cloud of doctrine, because just as a worldly harvest increases when rain clouds gather in the sky and rain falls, so the clouds of doctrine, such as the retentions and meditative stabilizations, gather in the mental continuum of a 10th ground bodhisattva, which is like the sky, and the rain of doctrine falls, increasing the collection of the marvelous harvest of virtues in the continuums of trainees, and for this reason it is called cloud of doctrine. So again, if you're the disciple of a 10th ground bodhisattva, then you are on the receiving end of this rain of doctrine. But again, the bodhisattva has amazing ability at this level, but once more, nothing compared to what they will have when they enter the path of no more learning, the Buddha ground. Maitreya's text is quoted, because like a rain cloud, the two pervade the doctrine like the sky. It is called cloud of doctrine. I'm not sure what the two is there, the rain cloud, the two pervade the doctrine. Anyway, Nagarjuna's praise of the element of qualities. Oh, it says down there, the two. There's the footnote. Can refer to either retentions and meditative stabilizations, which is what was mentioned in our commentary, or love and compassion, which are the motivating factors for the reign of Dharma. Anyway, sorry I missed that when I first read it. The stainless body, Nagarjuna says, which has this nature of wisdom arising everywhere from the retentions of the Buddhas, equal to the sky, is a cloud of doctrine. So again, we're at the point where this is the last moments of what we call a sentient being just before becoming a Buddha. A Buddha is still a being, a person, but is no longer a sentient being because that's the term that is reserved for those who have not yet attained enlightenment. Now we get to chapter 4, Buddhahood. Before we do that, let's look at what bodhicitta is called on the 10th ground. Bodhicitta on the 10th ground is called pleasant Dharma song like. It's a strange phrase, but it's like a pleasant Dharma song, because the 10th ground is characterized again, focusing on the perfection of exalted wisdom. And just as a pleasant Dharma melody inspires those who hear it, likewise the Bodhisattva greatly inspires trainees by teaching them the Dharma in a way that pleases them, again, due to the exalted wisdom that Bodhisattva possesses. The mind generation associated with exalted wisdom, Geshe-la says, is like the pleasant song of Dharma, because such a bodhisattva gives teachings which cause the arisal of aspiration in sentient beings by means of the 4 correct cognitions, which are the method for attaining liberation. Again, I think this is the force that we also saw, the individual correct knowledges, which are the means through which the eventual mind of a Buddha will be manifested, and then these will be there in their perfected state. Again, those were correlated with the 9th ground earlier, but it seems that they also give rise to some of the qualities on the 10th ground. In Sutra, it says, great bodhisattvas train in the 20 emptinesses. In other words, to develop one's extensive knowledge of emptiness, but of course also to know all of the phenomena that are empty. I'm not going to go into the 20 emptinesses. They are essentially ways of dividing up emptiness based on the basis for those emptinesses. And so they encompass all phenomena. And so in that way, you're not just training in the emptiness itself, the ultimate truth, but the variety of phenomena that are the basis for that, which are the conventional truths. So in the context of the mind generation that is like the pleasant song of Dharma mainly refers to the teachings on the 20 emptinesses, which is, of course, the Dharma that is the ultimate Dharma that we want to give to others is emptiness. But once more, it also encompasses conventional reality because it refers to all of the phenomena that have emptiness. Recalling that again, every phenomenon is together with its own emptiness. They always exist inextricably bound up with each other. Now, there is some of these 22 types of bodhicitta. There are some of them that are associated entirely with the pure ground. So even though we just talked about different types of bodhicitta, there are these in the list that I'm going to go through really quickly. I'm not going to do any of Geshe-la's teachings on this or any of the sutra recitations or anything. But first, bodhicitta on the three pure grounds is sometimes called the great king-like bodhicitta because it's associated with clairvoyance, and it is able to perform others' purpose without difficulty and without losing the realizations that have already been attained. Again, if you have clairvoyances, then you can engage in activities for others with that perfect knowledge of knowing their minds, their past lives, and so on. It's also called treasury-like bodhicitta because it's associated with merit and exalted wisdom. And the accumulation of those, especially of a bodhisattva on the 10th ground, is so great that it is like a treasury. So again, the accumulation of merit is already amazing when you enter into the 8th ground, but it gets greater and greater, and wisdom gets greater and greater as well. It's also called highway-like bodhicitta because it's associated with the 37 harmonies with enlightenment. Again, another list of things that I don't have time to go through. It is taught in the basic program as well, that chapter 4 of ornament, but you may have heard of these before. There's a commonality with the even those who practice the Hinayana path, the fundamental vehicle, in terms of these having some of these same qualities. But it is the path which all the Aryas of the 3 times have traveled and is the path that all future Tathagatas will travel. So again, Aryas refers to any being who has direct realization of emptiness, whether they're on the Hinayana or the Mahayana. So again, it's associated with these practices we have in common because all Aryas have traveled this path and all future Buddhas and so on will travel it. The 3 pure grounds, bodhicitta, is also called mount-like because it is associated with compassion and special insight, and it easily goes to enlightenment. In other words, you have a mount, like a very quick horse that will get you there without falling into either of the 2 extremes of psychic existence, which is the extreme we're all in now, at least I assume all of us are, unless you're an arhat or a Buddha or a pure ground bodhisattva. Anyway, or the extreme of solitary peace, which is, of course, the extreme that those on the Hinayana path, the fundamental vehicle, fall into, of succumbing to the pleasure of solitary peace, checking out of this life and abiding in that. So we have this perfect mount of compassion for all beings, as well as special insight into the nature of reality, kind of compassion and wisdom, which helps us to avoid either of those extremes. The wisdom helps us to avoid psychic existence because we're no longer caught up in all of the afflictions and so on. And then compassion keeps us from falling into solitary peace because we want to benefit others. We don't want to check out of samsara. One more, the 3 pure grounds, is also called geyser-like bodhicitta because it's associated with retention and confidence. And a bodhisattva with such a mind generation upholds the Dharma that has already been heard and that which will be heard in the future. I'm not sure about why it's geyser-like based on this description, but it seems to have something to do with the fact that a geyser kind of is continually spewing out the hot steam and what have you. And so in this way, you would kind of have an upholding of the Dharma that you have heard, will be heard, and so on. I don't know. There is a book that may have a description of it that I forgot to check earlier, like a gushing spring. Yeah, it doesn't give much more. Just talks about the teachings. All right, so let's go on then to the final section of this, other than this etymologies, which is very short, and we've already referred to most of it. So if we don't have time for that, that'll be okay. I do want to talk about the Mahayana result grounds, which is essentially the Buddha ground and the path of no more learning. So let's go back to our text and talk about what transpires on the Buddha ground when one has abandoned completely, not just the afflictive obstructions, but now the knowledge obstructions. So this has three parts to it. Definitions. We're going to first go into the definition of a Buddha ground, and then go into the divisions, and then the mode of actualizing the effect. So the definition of the Buddha ground is posited as a final exalted wisdom, final meaning that there is nothing beyond it. It's not in the process of getting somewhere, it is the destination, which possesses the supreme of all aspects, the best of all aspects, all the qualities, all the knowledge, all the power, all of the compassion, all the various things are completely possessed. The definition of a Mahayana path of no more learning, which again is synonymous with the Buddha ground, is posited as a Mahayana clear realizer, which has abandoned exhaustively the two obstructions. So again, I don't need to comment on that because I just explained that a short while ago. So as I just said, the two, Buddha ground and Mahayana path of no more learning, are synonymous. Of course, why it's called the path of no more learning is because you're no longer a learner, meaning learning, developing the mind to the goal of Buddhahood. There's no more learning needed because you have perfected the mind in that state of omniscience. In brief, whatever is a Mahayana ground which has completed all the good qualities of separation from faults, such as the 10 powers, the 4 fearlessnesses, the 18 unshared qualities of a Buddha, and so forth, and all the fruitional good qualities, such as the 32 major and 80 minor marks and so forth, is called the completely radiant Buddha ground. That's it. That's the final destination. That's where we're all headed. And so then he goes on with Nagarjuna and what have you. I did want to give you, again, just a short explanation. It's impossible in the time that we have to go into all of these various qualities. The 10 powers was mentioned. And of course, this means that one has abandoned any ignorance of these things and has perfect knowledge of all of these various topics. Knowledge of sources and non-sources means that the Buddha at this point, that mind knows the sources that lead to happiness, the non-sources of happiness that would lead to suffering, for example. Knowledge of the fruition of karma, how karma ripens into various results, and knows the intricacies of all of that, how that happens. Again, we cannot know the subtle workings of karma in our limited minds, but a mind of a Buddha has complete knowledge of everything involved in all the various karmic fruitions. Third, knowledge of those who are superior and those who are inferior, or those who have faith and those having heavy afflictions and so forth. Again, this is that knowledge of what the beings are that exist and what their qualities are that would make it easier to teach them the Dharma, more difficult, what have you. Knowledge of the varieties of dispositions, what the dispositions of those potential disciples, those sentient beings are. Knowledge of the varieties of trainees' interests in the various great and small vehicles. There are some who are destined to enter into the Hinayana first. They simply don't have the interest and the disposition to be able to do that. So the Buddha, again, would have perfect knowledge of that, nothing obscuring that. So the Buddha would know exactly how to guide various trainees. Sixth, knowledge of the paths proceeding to psychic existences and of the paths to the 3 enlightenments of hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattvas. Again, usually we use the term enlightenment for just referring to the final goal of a bodhisattva, but in many texts they do talk about a lesser enlightenment, which is the hearers, the middling enlightenment, which is solitary realizers, and great enlightenment, which is the bodhisattvas. But they know the paths that would lead to continued existence in samsara, as well as those that lead to the goals of the 2 Hinayana paths, as well as the Mahayana. Knowledge of the concentrations, liberations, meditative stabilizations, and meditative absorptions, and knowledge of others' afflictions and others' non-contamination. Again, these are all various levels of meditative practice, and they have knowledge, again, of the minds of others in terms of their afflictions, the non-contamination that they might have. mindful of former states, knowing all the various existences that beings have had, knowledge of one's own and others' deaths and rebirths, knowledge of the extinction of all contaminations. Again, that knowledge is absolutely unique to a Buddha, though all of these are fully formed in the state of Buddhahood, knowing that all contaminations have been eliminated from their own minds. Those are the 10 powers. The 4 fearlessnesses: fearlessness with respect to the assertion, I am completely and perfectly enlightened with respect to all phenomena. So the Buddha can say that without any fear being refuted in regard to that. Fearlessness with respect to teaching that the afflictive obstructions are obstacles to liberation, and that the obstructions to omniscience or knowledge obstructions are obstacles to simultaneous cognition, omniscient mind. Simultaneous cognition of all phenomena, and that therefore these are to be ceased. So again, the Buddha is fearless with regard to teaching that that is what needs to be done. Fearless with respect to teaching the paths of deliverance, and fearlessness with respect to asserting that the contaminations have been extinguished. Again, similar to the knowledge of that, but here it's the fearlessness of being able to proclaim that. So Buddha can proclaim all 4 of these fearlessly, with no fear of being contradicted, with no fear of any error, any faults. Then the 18 unshared attributes of Buddhas, which was also mentioned in our text, being non-mistaken physically, such as not going on the wrong road. So Buddhas never make mistakes physically in terms of what they do in their embodied state. Being non-mistaken verbally, they never say things that are in error. They are not decreasing in mindfulness at any point because their mind is perfect in that set in mindfulness of all things, all people, all beings. Not ever not being in meditative equipoise. Even though they have the awareness of conventional phenomena, they are also every moment in meditative equipoise on emptiness. Not having the various discriminations of one pointedly apprehending psychic existence as to be forsaken and nirvana as to be attained, or in other words, not discriminating psychic existence and nirvana, or phenomena and their emptiness, as different entities. So we kind of are one-pointedly seeing all these things in terms of them being bound up together, phenomena and their emptiness, psychic existence and nirvana. It's just a matter of our perspective, the mind that is observing this world. Not being disinterested, Buddha will always be interested. These 4 that are kind of put together, aspiration, effort, mindfulness, and wisdom, these are called I think this is the same. Actually, no, the 3 of these, I think, are part of what are called the 5 powers, and then become the 5 forces on the path of preparation. We didn't talk about a lot of these other things that are taught in various texts around what else happens as the Bodhisattva moves through the 5 paths. But we know what these are in general: aspiration, effort, mindfulness, and wisdom. These are attributes that the Buddha has that are just, perfected. Again, different ways of parsing up what a Buddha's experience is. The 11th, non-degeneration of liberation, that is, not degenerating from the abandonment of obstructions. Non-degeneration of the wisdom realizing liberation. And then 13, 14, 15, governing by wisdom the actions of body, speech, and mind, those 3. And then finally, the last 3 of the 18, non-obstructed wisdom with respect to all objects of knowledge in the past, present, and future, due to the absence of any impeding obstructions. So this is kind of mind-blowing that a Buddha's mind, all Buddha's minds, are unobstructed with regard to knowing all phenomena of past, present, and future, all 3 times. Kind of makes you wonder how they know objects of the future. I think I've seen some writings on that, and it's kind of a heady subject. So, all right, let's go back into our text. I'm getting kind of fuzzy here in terms of the screen. I'll see if I clear up over time. So let's go down to what Nagarjuna says about Buddhahood. It says, the ground of Buddhahood is different, being in all ways inconceivable. We can't even imagine what a Buddha's mind is like. We can put all these words on it and these various qualities, but it's inconceivable. Its boundless extent is merely said to encompass the 10 powers. Each of a Buddha's powers is immeasurable too, like the limitless number of all migrators. The limitlessness of a Buddha's qualities is said to be like that of space, earth, water, fire, and wind in all directions, what are often called the 5 elements that everything physically is consisting of. So as we see those elements in all directions, this is the limitlessness of a Buddha's qualities. Again, we can't even describe what is involved in a Buddha's qualities, but nonetheless, we can talk about them indirectly. Let's go into the description then of the divisions of the Buddha ground, which essentially is referring to what we often call the kayas, or the bodies of a Buddha, which isn't meant to necessarily be literally taken as a body, like a physical body, but a component of a Buddha's experience. And some of them are physical bodies, but nonetheless, let's take a look at these. Again, hopefully most of you have heard teachings on these before. In general, there are many divisions of Buddha bodies, such as those into 5, 4, and 3. I've actually never heard one into 5, and I'm not sure what that one is. But anyway, I do hear 4, 3, and 2. But when these divisions are condensed, they are condensed into 2. The truth body, or Dharmakaya, which is the fulfillment of one's own purposes, and the form body, or Rupakaya in Sanskrit, which is the fulfillment of others' purposes. This is because the two that are the two types of form bodies, the complete enjoyment body, what's called the Sambhogakaya, and I'll put these all on the screen with slides in a moment, and secondly, the emanation body, which is the Nirmanakaya, they make up the excellent form body, the Rupakaya, that is the imprint of having completed the collection of merit. And those are the conventional body, which is the fulfillment of others' purposes. So essentially what we have in terms of the form body is any physical manifestation of the Buddha mind so that it can help other sentient beings. And there are two main types of that, complete enjoyment body and emanation body, but they are similar in that they are both fulfilled through having completed the collection of merit, remembering that there are those two main wings of a bird that need to be complete, need to be intact to get to the destination, the shore of enlightenment. We need to have the complete accumulation of merit that's through the method side of the path. And that will result in your form bodies, the ability to benefit others in physical form. Then it says at the very bottom there, and the two, the nature body and the wisdom truth body, which make up the excellent truth body, the Dharmakaya, that is the imprint of having completed the collection of wisdom, are the ultimate body, which is the fulfillment of one's own purpose. So how is your own welfare brought to its culmination? Through having the Dharmakaya in the form of the wisdom truth body, the Yanakaya, and then also the Svavika Kaya. It's always a hard one for me to say. The nature body, which, as we'll see, is the emptiness of the mind of that Buddha. But essentially what we have then is, if you talk about two, there's the Rupakaya and the Dharmakaya, form body, truth body. This is the mind of a Buddha. This is the way that that mind manifests in physical form. It has two underneath it, which are the complete emanation body, Sambhogakaya, and the emanation bodies, which are the Nirmanakaya. Two different ways that those form bodies manifest in physical appearance for the benefit of others. And they're different, of course, than what the Bodhisattva had in terms of their capabilities prior to this, because they manifest spontaneously as needed for sentient beings exactly in accord with their karma. Over on the wisdom side, the Dharmakaya, that is a culmination of your own purpose, whereas the form bodies are all about the purpose of others. You have the two divisions there of the truth, wisdom truth body, which is essentially your omniscient mind, and then the emptiness of that mind, which is the nature truth body. So let's take a look at these with the slides. I figured I would do one little demonstration before going into the slides. The truth body, as I said, can be divided into two: the wisdom truth body, or Yanakaya, the uncontaminated exalted wisdom that is a Buddha's mind, their omniscient mind, and then the nature truth body, Svabhavika Kaya. I missed a syllable, I think, when I said it. Svabhavika Kaya. Svabhavika Kaya. It's a hard one to say. The reality or emptiness of that mind. It's kind of interesting. They put in this division that is the nature truth body, because the emptiness of your own mind. Remember in the meditation tonight where I talked about Buddha nature? We can say there are two aspects to Buddha nature. There's the emptiness of your own mind that is together with contaminations, that becomes the nature truth body when it is free of contaminations. And the wisdom truth body is essentially your mind right now that is fundamentally pure, but is together with contaminations when all of those contaminations have been removed. So in terms of what we often call the developmental Buddha nature, that's our wisdom truth body when it fully develops. And then the natural Buddha nature, the naturally abiding Buddha nature, which is the emptiness of that mind. It's the same emptiness, it's just that the basis is different. At the time of right now, when we're together with contaminations, we call it our naturally abiding Buddha nature. But when it is fully purified, our mind is fully purified, it becomes the nature truth body, the svabhavika kaya, the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha. So a wisdom truth body can be categorized into two. Remember, I mentioned these earlier, of an omniscient consciousness realizing ultimate truths, and then one realizing conventional truths. They're realizing, the Buddha's mind is realizing it simultaneously, so there's no differentiation in the moment in terms of what's being realized. It means that all truths, all categories of phenomena are known by that wisdom truth body, that Dharmakaya. Then the nature truth body is qualified by the two purities, the natural purity, which is the emptiness of the mind, and then because this is the fully purified mind, that it's the basis for that emptiness, we can also speak of its purity of adventitious stains. This is a true cessation existing in the continuum of a Buddha superior, the complete cessation of all the obscurations that have stained the mind since beginningless time that are now gone. So we can talk about the purity of the mind in terms of its nature truth body from two vantage points. The natural purity that is its emptiness, it's together with your mind right now. But then the purity of adventitious stains we don't yet have because we haven't done the work to attain all of the cessations of these levels of obstructions, the afflictive and the knowledge obstructions. Okay. Going on to the form body, the Rupakaya, it can be divided into two. The complete enjoyment body, Sambhogakaya, which is a final form body possessing the five certainties. We'll talk about those in a moment. But this is essentially an emanation of a Buddha that's in this form of a complete enjoyment, meaning it is there for the complete enjoyment and the access of those Arya Bodhisattvas, those Bodhisattvas who have the ability to go to such a pure realm where that body abides and receive teachings there. Then there is what we normally call, or other ways that the Buddha manifests, an emanation body, Nirmanakaya. This is a final form body that is distinguished by not possessing the five certainties. So it's not abiding in a pure land with all of these various things that we're going to see on the next slide. Instead, this is the variety of ways that Buddhas appear to benefit you and I and other beings who don't have that superior knowledge of an Arya Bodhisattva. So the complete enjoyment body possesses the five certainties: certainty of body. It displays or is ornamented with the 32 signs and the 80 marks of a Buddha. We saw those in our text. Again, don't have time to go into all of those. You can find them in some texts, but they are essentially all the culmination of all the various things the Bodhisattva has done that ripen into the body of a Buddha that abides in such a realm where it is accessed again by these Bodhisattvas. There's a certainty of doctrine. It only teaches the Mahayana, not the Hinayana, because its audience is Bodhisattva superiors, Aryas. Certainty of place. It abides only in the highest pure land of Akanishta, where the Bodhisattva attains enlightenment in the aspect of an enjoyment body. So this is kind of like the culmination of your own appearance in a pure land that is ripened through the force of your own uncontaminated karma, that is then accessible by those Bodhisattvas who do have these higher realizations. Certainty of time. Well, the time is that it abides until all sentient beings are liberated from psychic existence. I think it's going to be around for a while. Certainty of retinue. it only has a retinue of bodhisattva superiors, again, Arya bodhisattvas, because that's who can access these Buddhas in this form of a complete enjoyment body in these pure lands, Akanishta. Akanishta is technically, means nothing higher, I think, or not low. And essentially it is one of the, in the fourth form realm in the Pure Lands there. And that's where the Buddha abides. So it can be accessed by beings because it's still within the form realm, still something that is within kind of samsara, so that but it's only again accessible by those bodhisattvas who have attained direct insight into emptiness. The emanation body is of three types. These are the three that are often set out in the sutras. An artisan emanation body. These are emanations who are skilled in the arts, and their stories about the ways that Buddhas appeared as like different arts, like lute players and things like that. And I'm not going to go into, I don't have time for all the stories on that, but it's said to be a very specific way that Buddhas will benefit others and convince them to engage in the Dharma. Then there is what we often call a birth emanation body. I think Geshe Kelsang Wangmo called this incarnated emanation body. These are emanations which take rebirth, and I should almost put that in quotes, because it's in various forms, whether animate or inanimate. So they say Buddhas can appear as bridges and cars and whatever was needed by sentient beings if those beings have the karma for that physical appearance. So it's not necessarily an animate object that we see like as a being. It could also be inanimate objects, but they're done in order to benefit sentient beings. So whereas again, with the complete enjoyment body, you can see that that's very specific for certain beings. These types of emanations are for anybody. Anyone can achieve, an appearance of a Buddha in the form of somebody on the road who helps you, or whatever the case might be, a teacher. Some of our gurus are said to be, birth emanation bodies. Supreme emanation body is what the Buddha himself was, Buddha Shakyamuni. These are emanations who possess the 32 signs and 80 marks and who display the 12 deeds. According to the Mahayana, Prince Siddhartha didn't become a Buddha in this life. He was already a Buddha appearing in the form of a supreme emanation body, displaying what are called the 12 deeds, which again, I don't have time to go into, but essentially they refer to all the things of the Buddha leaving the palace and going on a spiritual search and and sitting under the Bodhi tree and various things that are all part of how a supreme emanation body appears to begin turning the wheel of Dharma in a particular world system. And it is said that the Buddha, in the way that we have the images of the Buddha, the statues and tankas and so on, have the 32 signs and 80 marks. Now, not everybody can see those necessarily, but they are there in that emanation of the Buddha. Okay. So let's jump to the text to make sure we've kind of cleared up that with the last little bits from Nagarjuna. From Precious Garland, he says, the form body of a Buddha arises here from the collection of merit. The body of truth, in brief, O king, is born from the collection of wisdom. Again, that was what I pointed out earlier, is that all that merit that we accumulate with compassionate method culminates in the form bodies, the Rupakaya. All of our wisdom culminates in the Dharmakaya, our own omniscient consciousness that is the truth body. Then from the 60 stanzas, by this virtue may all beings complete the collections of merit and wisdom and attain the two excellent bodies which arise from merit and wisdom. So it's giving another citation that shows that these two bodies arise from merit and wisdom. And then Maitreya's sublime continuum, the ultimate body, the fulfillment of one's own purpose, and the conventional body, the fulfillment of others' purposes, which depends on that. In such passages, the Buddha bodies are set forth in many Mahayana scriptures and their commentaries. The last outline before the etymologies, the mode of actualizing the effect, I'll go through this rather quickly since we're running out of time. When one is definite in the Mahayana lineage from the very beginning, or even is temporarily definite in the fundamental vehicle lineage, it is definite that in the end, entering into the Mahayana path, one must become fully purified as a Buddha. That's the final vehicle for all of us. Every being will eventually enter into Buddhahood. Therefore, whichever of those one is, initially one settles through limitless reasonings, the very subtle selflessness, having two aspects, that of persons and of phenomena. Again, I don't need to speak much about that for most of you. Then one practices the Mahayana paths completely, without separating from the branches of familiarizing with just that view of emptiness, whereby one progresses serially over the grounds of engagement through belief, where one hasn't yet developed a direct realization of emptiness, and the grounds of Bodhisattva superiors, where one has. One abandons without remainder the predispositions for mistaken dualistic appearance, that's again the knowledge obstructions, by means of the Vajra-like meditative stabilization that is the exalted wisdom at the end of the continuum of the 10 grounds. Thus, in the next moment, one actualizes the truth body, which perceives directly all the limitless instances of objects of knowledge, just like a wet olive placed in the palm of your hand that you could see very clearly. This is done with the wisdom truth body and the suchness, which is the reality of the exalted mind, possessing the two purities, having become of one taste, like water placed in water. So again, that's the two truth bodies, the wisdom truth body and the nature truth body. Simultaneous with actualizing that truth body, the adamantine body of mental nature of the person at the end of the continuum of the 10 grounds, which has the aspect of being adorned by the major and minor marks, or the signs and marks, becomes a complete enjoyment body, which is not different in entity from the wisdom truth body, and the continuum of which is not severed even for a moment until space is consumed. So that's kind of the transformation into the complete enjoyment body. So there is this experience then again in Akanishta of that newly formed Buddha in that complete enjoyment form. From every hair pore of this complete enjoyment body, there always arise numberless emanation bodies. These make displays uninterruptedly as long as the sky remains for the sake of migrators, with inconceivable sport of exalted body, speech, and mind, exactly in accordance with the constituents, thoughts, and dormancies of migrators. So it makes it sound like, again, like there's almost a process. Truth body appears, then complete enjoyment body, and then the emanation bodies. But they say they actually all happen simultaneously. But we can say that it is from the complete enjoyment body, which is the culmination of that path of purification of that bodhisattva in the state of Buddhahood, that then the emanation bodies come forth. It is said that the place of actual, let me scroll this up a little bit. It is said that the place of actual initial full purification by means of the system of Mahayana perfection vehicle is only the glorious, heavily adorned highest Pure Land. And the place of displaying later the mode of purification is the desire realm. So one, displays that within the desire realm, but it's actually attained within this Akanishta. With respect to where initial Buddhification occurs, I didn't know that this was a word. I have heard it before, but Buddhification occurs initially. Chandrakirti's supplement says, just as the moon in a stainless sky illuminates clearly all migrators, so you strove repeatedly on the prior ground at producing the 10 powers of Buddhahood, and in the highest Pure Land you gain that supreme pacification, the state for the sake of which you strove, the unparalleled completion of all good qualities. With respect to the mode of actualizing the truth body, Chandrakirti says, through having burned completely the dry fuel of objects of knowledge, this peace is the truth body of conquerors. It is then without production and without cessation, and thus the mind has stopped, whereby this rank of Buddhahood is actualized by the complete enjoyment body. It doesn't mean the mind literally has stopped. The consciousness continues on, but all of the coarser minds have stopped. With respect to the mode of actualizing the complete enjoyment body, the body of peace manifests like a wish-granting tree, and like a wish-fulfilling gem is non-conceptual. Until migrators are released, it remains for the world's fortune. It appears to those bodhisattvas free from the elaborations, again, because it is appearing only to them. Emanation body, Chandrakirti says, again, you having the immovable truth body come to the three existences, and with emanations come from the joyous land, are born and teach the wheel of peaceful enlightenment. In that way, you completely lead to nirvana, all worldly beings having varieties of behavior and bound by many bonds of attainment. because I'm not going to go into etymologies because we went through that previously in talking about what is meant by grounds. What I want to say before we get into the concluding verse, which again, I'm just going to read it, is that I was going to share some slides, and they'll be in your slides that'll get shared out on the Dropbox. But Jeffrey Hopkins points out that essentially, although this is the way it's set out in Sutra, know that in order to remove the subtlest obscurations that exist in the mind that we haven't really discussed here because they're only taught in Tantra, you do have to enter the tantric vehicle, and more specifically, highest yoga tantra, to remove everything to become a Buddha. So it is said that the 10th ground Bodhisattva, if they have not yet entered the tantric vehicle, the Vajrayana, will have to enter into that path in order to become fully enlightened. So I'm just pointing that out. You can, again, read the slides when they get up on the screen. Let's just look at these concluding verses that I'll read really quickly. The liberation story of the supreme white swans of conquerors' children who greatly move the broad wings of method and wisdom in order to be refreshed in the lotus lake of the qualities of one thus gone is the heart spring of all those fortunate ones wanting liberation. That the groups of right hearers and solitary realizers, wearied by the path of psychic existence, having rested for a while in the city of thorough peace, having gone to that state of nirvana, are led to the park of the precious supreme vehicle is the magical artifice of the leader, the captain. This is what the Buddha has in mind for all beings, even if they've attained that state of nirvana, that solitary peace. In the expanse of black clouds of my mind, in the midnight of the degenerate age, the flashing for a moment of the illumination of good explanation through the brief lightning streak of a virtuous mind is the expression of the ceaseless exalted activity of the conqueror. So in this text, we have that flash of lightning, giving us kind of illuminating perfectly the path to enlightenment and everything that is entailed. I hope this has been of some benefit to you. I'm sorry to be rushing it at the end, but nonetheless, we did make it through, which is good. And are there any questions before we conclude tonight? Just to make sure that if there's something that you are really desiring to ask, that you ask it now while you've got me here live. Anyone? Do know that I do have a website. If some of you don't know my email address, you can always contact me through my website, through donhandrick.com, and I'm happy to field questions if you do have questions that come up as you review the slides or look back over the text. No questions tonight?
I
Everyone's,
do have
oh, great, Afisha.
one clarifying question.
Okay.
So instantly, as soon as you enter the the seventh, the eighth ground, are you able to remain in human form, or do you automatically have to go exist in a pure realm?
So for the eighth ground, I don't think no that you would still be in that human form. It would the what would happen in terms of when you attain Buddhahood, when you enter into the Buddha ground, then at that point there is a manifestation of the complete enjoyment body that is in that pure realm, um, and your human form would probably still remain, but it's no longer again. The only sort of the main receptacle for your consciousness, your awareness, because your awareness is that of an omniscient being at that point. So yeah, was that what you were referring to? Was the 10th ground into the Buddha ground,
No,
or?
the eighth, ninth, before you get to the 10th. So I know that it says pure grounds at the top.
Oh, right.
And I
Okay.
know that pure grounds are formless realms. So my clarifying question was, as soon
Oh,
as you hit the
okay.
eighth ground, would you end up in a formless realm per
Okay,
se?
so that's not a correct interpretation of pure grounds then.
Okay.
By pure grounds, we don't mean pure lands. We mean
Okay.
that those three grounds, the 8th, ninth, and 10th, are pure because they are free of all of the afflictive obstructions. And they're also free of any self-cherishing. All of that has been completely removed. They're pure from that vantage point of no longer having those contaminations. Okay, so it's not that they are pure realms that these bodhisattvas are abiding in. They would still have their human form that they went into that meditative equipoise with, and they would practice with that. And of course, it's going to be potentially over many lifetimes on the sutra path that they complete that third great countless eon of merit. But they would continue taking rebirth in a variety of realms in order to finish the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom that allows them to get to the Buddha ground.
So
Okay.
that brings up another question.
Okay.
So you
Sure.
can move from the human realm straight into Buddhahood?
Well, what happens is your consciousness is no longer kind of in, when you look at even when bodhisattvas are born on the 10th ground, they are still born through the power of their compassion and go through a process of taking rebirth and what have you, driven by that. They would still have, that body that if they are sitting in meditative equipoise, again, this is not taking into consideration the tantric teachings I just mentioned that say that you have to be, acquiring all of the tantric empowerments and all of the practices of tantra in order to attain enlightenment. But if they are sitting in meditative equipoise in a human form, what happens is their mind is released from any sort of being bound up within cyclic existence in the manner that it was when they attained that rebirth as a 10th ground bodhisattva. And they are attaining simultaneously a complete enjoyment body, which is abiding in this akanishta, this highest realm. And then they
Mm-hmm.
are also attaining all of the emanation bodies. And that consciousness is, again, probably together with that human body that they sat in meditative equipoise with.
Mm-hmm.
But the experience of that Buddha mind is very different. It's no longer sort of connected with just a body. It's everywhere, emanating in whatever ways are suitable to other beings, as well as abiding in this complete enjoyment body form. I don't know. That's a good question in terms of I don't know all the exact mechanics of what happens there. But
Okay.
obviously, this transformation into a Buddha mind means that there's no longer anything that acts as any sort of boundary for where that mind goes. I mean, we can say that we are being pervaded by the minds of all the Buddhas that exist right now because they are
Mm-hmm.
without a doubt in every realm, in wherever there are sentient beings, there is the Buddha mind wanting to assist beings. But again, the assistance is always limited by the karma of the beings that are needing to be assist. And that's why some beings might be able to see a Buddha appearing before them and teaching them, and other people might not even have access to uh, a coarser form of a Buddha that would appear. So that's kind of my take on it. I don't know that I've received
Yeah.
teachings that spell it out in terms of, like I said, the exact mechanics, but it does seem that at that moment when you cross over that threshold and you become a Buddha, the experience of mind and embodiment is going to be extremely different from what it
Mm-hmm.
was on the 10th ground.
And my last clarifying question.
Hmm.
So you said that they come back because of their compassion.
Hmm.
How does that compassion differ from attachment? Because I know I've learned before, and this could be a misconception, that to be able to be reborn, you have to have some attachment.
Mm. That's when one is under the control of the afflictions. And
Mm,
so again, that would have been prior to all of this, when we're especially talking about the pure grounds. Well, the
mm-hmm.
bodhisattvas don't have any attachment.
I know.
So they would definitely be reborn only through compassion. They wouldn't be taking rebirth through the mechanism of the 12 links and so on. But even when, it is true that even prior to that, on the first 7 grounds, it's also said that they don't take rebirth through the force of affliction, but rather through, or karma, but through the force of compassion. So what does that look like there? Again, I think what they're doing is they're sort of supplanting all of that. They still are taking rebirth within the realm of samsara, but they're no
Mm-hmm.
longer subject to, again, the power of those afflictions arising that ripen the karmic seeds that cause them to take rebirth. Rather, they think compassionately about where they want to be born, where they would be helping sentient beings most, and so on. And they dictate their rebirths on the basis of that. And that's all that I've heard. I don't know that, again, I can explain it in any more detail in terms of how they actually have the power to do that. But the normal process by which sentient beings require some level of craving and grasping, those are again the 8th and 9th links of the 12 links of dependent arising that ripen a karmic seed that cause you to be propelled into your next rebirth. Those would not be operative for the bodhisattva who is a superior, who has achieved that direct realization of emptiness. At least I'm pretty sure of that. Let me pull up that chart again one more time. Sorry, I know some of you probably need to get going, but let's, again, at point G is the realization of ultimate bodhicitta. Um, I remember, I can't remember where we saw this. It would say basically that from, I think it's from the first ground on, again, once you become an Arya Bodhisattva, that you no longer take rebirth through the force of karma and afflictions, but only through the force of compassion. I'd have to go back and look at the text to confirm that. But again, that would just mean it just sort of supplants the normal process of the 12 links that are occurring with a mind of compassion that causes a karmic seed to ripen, that allows the Bodhisattva to take rebirth in the form that they desire in order to benefit others. Okay.
Yeah, this is literally my last question, then I'll let everybody
Okay.
go. I get that. I think what's confusing me is that they don't take rebirth based on karmic afflictions, but
Uh-huh.
some of what we would perceive as bodhisattvas, they do have negative karmic seeds ripening, or what we would perceive as negative karmic
Oh,
seeds,
uh-huh.
because they get ill. So, like
Sure.
Lama Yeshe is an example.
Mhm.
So it's not. So I don't. So if they have gotten, so is it that they haven't gotten rid of all their negative karma as yet?
Well, again, it all depends upon who that being is. If we talk about
Right.
somebody like Lama Yeshe or Lama Zopa or His Holiness, it's possible that they're Buddhas and that they've
Mm-hmm.
fully purified. And then you might wonder even more, well, why are they experiencing that? Well, they're not
Right.
experiencing that. Those are actually ripenings of our karma because
Oh,
we have the karma to see a being that is our guru or is in that form, getting ill, aging, dying, all these various things that they demonstrate as well, that are essentially our karma more than they are the karma of that being. So when it really depends upon the basis, but if this is a fully purified being, they absolutely would never have any of those karmic seeds ripen because they've been completely disempowered. Instead, again, any appearance of suffering is simply that, an appearance, and it's the appearance to the sentient beings who are witnessing it. This is at least the view in the Tibetan Buddhism. It may be different in some of the other Mahayana traditions, because I've actually had some debates with a friend who's in Zen Buddhism about whether a Buddha experiences pain or not. And they often make this division of pain and suffering. Like pain is the physical sensation that happens, that a Buddha could still be pained by having a thorn put in their hand or something, but they wouldn't experience suffering.
okay.
But again, what I would say is they're not experiencing either pain or suffering because this is just a karmic appearance of the thorn going into the hand of a Buddha for those trainees who are witnessing this, and it's part of their karma as opposed to the karma of that Buddha. But again, just my speculation on that. I think once we get into this territory of these highly developed beings, it's very hard for us to put ordinary explanations on these things. So it's very hard when we talk about any of these beings to know exactly what they are. Say that they're a bodhisattva, though, and they're an Arya bodhisattva. Well, then again, it's very hard to say whether that might be a ripening of some past karma. That still can happen. They even talk
Okay.
about Nagarjuna himself dying from getting his head chopped off or something that was karmic retribution from some act of, slicing off the head of a being when he was trimming grass or something. Anyway, I think that those things can still happen when one's on the
Okay.
learning path. But if this is a Buddha, then it's definitely not their karma. It's our appearance.
I got that. Perfect. That was
Okay,
good. Thank you.
good. All right. Thanks for your
That,
questions, Aphasia. Yeah. All right.
that kind of answers my question, but I just
uh-huh.
wanted to clarify.
Sure.
So I'm thinking of, being like you've got Buddha, you've got Jesus, you've got Yogananda, you've got all these people who, like, I guess, avatars. And so they're reincarnating and going through the process of
Mhm.
discovery in a single lifetime as an
Right.
example.
Right.
But they're not necessarily, when you read about them, like I specifically with Yogananda, it doesn't look like it's a surprise, all his learning. So it doesn't look like he's
Mm.
aware of his own higher state. But I'm
Mm.
not sure if that's completely true, or if it's the way it's being expressed or something. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
I understand how people taking on karma and helping other people process their karma and all that. But I'm just curious about the idea that
Mm.
it's like they're going through this learning process um, as if they don't know. And is it that they don't know and they forgot on purpose, or
Yeah, and I guess the answer to that is it depends on what they really are. If these are Buddhas who are going through the process of showing that they're born, like if His Holiness being identified as the young child of these people and da da da, and then taking them to the monastery and training them in all these things and showing the aspect of not really knowing and learning from all these great masters or whatever. Well, then it's entirely a show. It's not. This is an enlightened being. This being already has omniscient mind, doesn't need to learn, doesn't need to go through this. It's the fact that once more we have the karma karma for that type of a being to appear and to relate to and to be involved with and so on. So it's more of a show, if you will, but a necessary show, because I think most beings wouldn't really know what to do with something that just sort of flew down from the sky or something and was this light body that could, shine light rays at all of us or do whatever. I mean, most people they need something that is similar to them to identify with and to create that sort of empathic connection with and so on. So there's reasons why they do all of this, why they might appear as Yogananda or appear as Jesus or appear as Muhammad or whoever. I mean, whatever being you want to point to that is helping beings spiritually in this world. And it's, again, because that is what is needed by beings. And so it's an appearance for the sake of those beings, not because of the what that being needs to go through in order to develop their qualities or what have you. If it's someone who's still on the learning path, then it would be different. Again, they might still need to do that learning and go through all of that in order to accumulate the wisdom and merit that they would be able to achieve Buddhahood on the basis of. So,
Yeah, I think like my understanding is like a saint is not necessarily a Buddha. They're just a high level consciousness. So they're still learning, but in their learning, they're also like, it's part of it is the giving. And so they're teaching in that way. And then there's like, so, I mean, I don't know everything. I'm just kind of like trying to put it.
No, and I think it's just a matter of, in Buddhism, we would say that whatever these labels are, we really don't know what a being is. Like, somebody who lives on our street, we may just see them as a neighbor that just kind of waves at us or something, but they could be a Buddha. I mean, we don't know. And so whether we call somebody a neighbor, a saint, whoever, these are purely labels that are based on our perception and the appearance to us. We don't know from their side what they are. And so again, whether we signify them as saints or bodhisattvas or whatever, that's more from the side of them. We wouldn't even know who's a bodhisattva. I mean, all of you could be bodhisattvas for all I know. And I'm sitting here, teaching to you at a level that, you're all looking at me and going, wow, he doesn't really know much, does he? So we just don't know. So whatever label we put on others, that is only known definitively by the person who is on the receiving end of that label, who really knows what they are in terms of their own spiritual development. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, I do. And then there's
Okay.
just one more question. Is it possible that we ourselves in our Buddha form come back to help ourselves in our ignorant forms?
I've never really entertained that question, but it's weird when we talk about Buddhas having perfect knowledge of the 3 times. It kind of makes you wonder, are you able to see the past phenomena of you when you were unenlightened and be of some assistance in that capacity? I don't know. That gets to be maybe more, beyond my understanding.
It just occurs to me, and I always laugh at the idea, but because we also have that inner guidance in our mind,
Sure.
and so that could be our Buddha nature coming back, and there's all kinds of options.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Thank you for your questions.
Okay,
I was shocked. Yeah.
thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and do our dedication prayers and dedicate